Okay, at this point that should give you enough of an introduction to the interface in order to create your first map. We'll go ahead and get started. To start off our map, let's go ahead and create a box. Let's drag out a box, really of any size. It's up to you as to the size you want to make your map. You'll kind of get an idea of how to recognize proportions over time, based on, say, player size and things like that. But this will be a fairly large room, or at least by Doom 3 standards. Okay, so now we're going to use Hollow. And there are some problems that arise whenever you use the Hollow button, but I'll go ahead and use it now. And you'll see that we now have our cube shape has been hollowed out so that we can move the camera inside. And basically, we have created a room that the player can walk around in. However, using Hollow does bring up some problems, and namely that it creates overlapping brushes. So if I've zoomed in here so you can see that these brushes do indeed overlap. So let me back out. Okay, and to fix that problem, we can select the walls, and the easiest way to do that, this is where select partial tall really comes in handy. I've switched to my XZ front view, and I'm going to drag out a brush. Okay, and now I'm going to choose select partial tall. And you'll see that here in the 3D view, all the walls have been selected, but the ceiling and floor have not. So with all the walls selected, we're going to resize them so that their height just barely touches the ceiling and floor. Okay, that fixes one problem with Hollow, but you also have to fix a problem that arises in the other dimension. To fix that, you can see that we still have the walls overlapping. So the easiest way to fix that is to select opposing walls. Okay, and because we have both brushes selected, any change I make to one will happen to the other. Okay, so now let me cycle through my orthogonal views, and we can see that there is no longer any overlapping of brushes. While it's really important to make sure that you don't have any brush overlap, it's also really important, matter of fact, it's essential to make sure that you don't have any leaks in your map. A leak is basically any gap between the shell of your map, in other words, your walls and the floors, and the void. Now, any gap in your map is a leak. And so you need to be very careful when you're aligning walls and making changes to the overall structure of your map, say adding a door or a hallway or a new room, that all of your brushes end up touching each other. All the outer shell brushes that end up touching each other. If not, you'll end up with a leak, which will basically mean that your level will not compile. So to demonstrate, I'm going to go ahead and create a leak on purpose. And the first one I'm going to do is going to be really, really obvious. I'm going to leave a nice large gap. Okay, and this gray area here, I'll move the camera out, this is called the void. In other words, your map needs to be completely sealed off from the void in order for Doom 3 to be able to render it. So, we've got a nice sizable gap in our map, and if I tried to compile it, I'll go over the compiling commands a little bit later on, but for now I'll just do it for testing, for demonstration purposes. And we will get an error. And we can see here that it says map shut down, leaked, node without a volume. So basically, whenever you have a leak in your map, you'll get a leaked message, and you'll also, another telltale message is that you'll get whatever your map name is, .proc not found. Now I've altered the map very slightly to show you that sometimes a leak can be really, really difficult to find. I will say that this map is leaked. And I'll also say that the leak occurs here between these two brushes. But at this particular grid depth, it's almost impossible to see. Now, if you watch, I'll zoom in, and we can see that indeed the map is leaked, and it would be something very difficult to spot by the naked eye. But I just wanted to demonstrate that leaks can happen, and they can kind of creep up on you. You have to be very careful about how you place your outer walls. Now, a quick way to fix a simple leak like this would be to snap to grid, because we know that this adjacent wall here does conform to the grid. Okay, so if we snap this piece to the grid, we can't even see it move, but if we zoom back in, we can see that again these two brushes are now touching each other again, and the map is no longer leaked. The next thing that we're going to do is apply a texture. And to do that, you click on the Media tab, and then Textures, Textures, and then you can search for any texture that you want to apply to a selected object. Now, I'll note that if you double-click on any one of these folders, it will load every single texture into the Textures window here. So like say I already have, basically the Textures window keeps track of every single texture that you've selected. And so, but I really don't use the Textures window that often. I typically just stick to the Media Inspectors window. So let's go ahead and find a texture for our ceiling. Let's select the ceiling, and we'll just do something in base floor. It doesn't really have to be, it doesn't have to exactly correspond. Let's do something like, I think that looks good for our ceiling. Now let's select floor. And if you want to copy a texture between, say, the ceiling and the floor, you highlight the object that is going to be getting the texture, and then you can middle click on a brush that already has the texture you want to apply. And as you can see, the floor now has the same texture that I middle clicked on. Okay, but I actually want to have something a little bit different between my floor and ceiling. So let me go find something else, like maybe that. I think that looks good. Or maybe that one. And so now we have separate textures for both the ceiling and the floor. Now the next texture we're going to apply is to the walls. And this is really where selecting partial tall comes in very handy. If you tried to go through and select all of these walls individually, rotating the camera and so on and so forth, that can be really annoying. A much quicker way is to do select partial tall, which we've gone over before. We just drag out a selection brush, and then we click on select partial tall, and we are in an XZ front view. And so select partial tall, and you'll notice that all the walls are selected, but the ceiling and floor are not. So now let's just pick a texture. We'll go to base wall, and we'll just do something nice and ugly like that. Why not?